Stories of life told by photographers.
I'm in a very delicate mood today, or mode, as I make my first picture for the walk today, my sketchbook. Or I wonder if it'll come through in my photography. I mean, your pictures are supposed to give a little bit of yourself as you make them, aren't they? And I'm feeling a bit sensitive today because young Barnes, Sir Barkalot, "Sir, please would you lightly saute my steak if I blink my eyelashes at you?" is, as I talk to you now, he's at the vet's having an op. The op, I suppose, not an op, the op. Oh, this morning, it broke my heart, it did. I sat in the consultation room with him and a lovely vet called Laura, who was really so kind to him. Barnes isn't so keen on vets, down probably to the fact that he met Mr. Thermometer in a rather unsavoury fashion the last time. But Laura was fantastic. We sat down, we talked, and she seemed to be aiming most of the conversation at Barnes, who actually for a while, give him his dues, looked at her and seemed to be taking on board what was about to happen. But then he broadly had bless him, a mild sense of panic as he realised that as we left the consultation room, he was going one way and I was going the other. So I can't lie, I'm a soft old sausage. These sort of things, they do affect me. But actually, radio, podcasting radio, and photography, of course, all those sort of things. God, it's a mite windy out here today, can you hear that? Being on the radio, some of my most challenging points of my life. I've always found it a very cathartic experience. It is that sort of looking through the viewfinder thing where you transport yourself into a different world, if only for a short time. And when I was on the microphone, and now making pictures while being on the mic, as they say, I find a real valley of peace, really. And because I know my other listener will think I'm sounding far too woo-woo, let me make a picture. Where should we start? Beautiful, it's sunny. Sunshine, and it's windy, but it's a warm wind. I feel the winds of change. Who was that by? Winds of Change. Wasn't that the Scorpions? Shutter speed 210. I've got the neutral density filter on. Let's open wide, F2. There we go. My sketchbooker to start the walk.
The Photowalk is brought to you by mpb.com. Quality used photo and video kit. Buy, sell, trade, create at mpb.com.
I handwrite some notes that I take out with me, particularly if you've sent a letter. I just write in the margins, but also for a lot of the show I type out my thoughts on my trusty, very, very old laptop, but and I try and work around my notes. If you could see them, you'd see it's like an ellipses fest. Word, 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 and then dot, dot, dot. Word, 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 dot, 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 word, dot, dot, dot. See what I mean? It's a kind of, I suppose really the ellipses are a kind of invitation for me to elaborate and, stand by, B word coming up, blather or blatherate. New word, English dictionary. But today my keyboard, it just started. Actually it was late last night when it started. Or the tiny computer gnomes that drive my laptop that live inside have gone on some sort of ellipses strike. We've got a lot of strikes in the UK at the moment. And it seems that the computer gnomes that live within my laptop have clearly joined the party. My dot, dot, dots have become, well, at most 2 dots, usually just 1 dot. There's a great possibility that my tiny brain, you know me, will get to a 1 dot ellipses and just stop. I won't know how to go onwards. Oh, praise whoever I should pray to, Neil. I can hear my other listener saying, a blather-free show. Wonderful. Anyway, there are some extraordinary letters on the show today, including one that's very personal, very historic. I'm very in need of Sean Tucker, actually, the philosophical YouTuber, to provide some kind of well-thought-out response to. And if I chatted with Sean after reading the letter, I would certainly have asked him to reply or to answer the question. And that question is, when is a photo story too personal to tell? I'll come to it later on. And, well, look at this, he says, segueing so neatly into sharing who my guests are today. I'm sounding far too self-congratulatory, but on the show today, I am joined by two old friends, not so much of the old, Neil. And I mean that with affection, for both Sean Tucker, who will be talking about his new publishing adventure into magazines, and who will be enthusing with us all, including my other listener, the power of commissioning ourselves to make our own printed stories. Plus, I am going to challenge him with the big why question. To ask somebody who's philosophical about their photography a why question is something I was not going to miss the opportunity to do. Then, also today, Valerie Jardin, whose street work I adore, but don't you dare say street in the wrong context. She has just been on the most extraordinary travels of late, and I, in essence, shoot the breeze with her on a few subjects, including the sport of extreme typewritering, made-up word. Actually, I wouldn't have a problem with ellipses. I might have to go back to my typewriter. And also, what you get on your plate when you order in a language you have no comprehension or understanding of, which I think is probably another extreme sport. So Sean Tucker and Valerie Jardin is like a dream team of thoughts and sharings.
Today on the Photowalk.
Those daily walks, getting out the house, it didn't have to be photography for me. It just had to be getting out the house and walking. I'm a massive advocate of, if you're a welter of emotions and you can't really work out what's going on, go for a long walk.
Photography changes lives, and I've heard that so many times. It's therapeutic for so many people.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today we're joined as you and I walk by Sean Tucker and Valerie Jardin in a show that's written by you, from the letters, the thoughts, the pictures that you've shared with me. Everyone is a photographer on this walk, whatever camera you use, and that includes the not-so-humble smartphone, because this is a show about how taking and making photos has you feel, what it does for us and others around us, and we'll be inspired as we walk by words from other picture makers and adventurers with a camera, past and present. In the mailbag today, as you heard, the question of when making a photo story may be, well, let's just say too personal. Or is that the whole point of telling stories? That they do hold weight because of their very, and I'm going to use the A word here, authentic nature. We've letters too from China, where the word freedom has a somewhat different connotation from one of our friends, and then we whiz along to France for more thoughts about photographing hands. Nearly 7 billion people on this planet are able to make a photograph with something and record life. So we're not walking alone, documenting our place and time in this world. Checklist out then. Coffee and Garibaldi's, absolutely essential. Check. Walking boots, check. Wind cheater, I'll need it today. It's brisk out there. Check. Let's walk. With my pictures today, I'm finding, I've instantly gone into photographing, well, not quite macro, but crisscrossy things. Is that a technical phrase, Neil? Yeah, crisscrossy things. I'm going quite low in terms of exposure, creating this sort of dark, moody, see, I said it's the mood thing, dark, moody frames, crisscrossing vegetation, plants and branches. Now, lest I forget, there is a new part of the website called Kit. Now, I know you're about to say, Neil, you always talk about the feeling being more important than the kit, but I think we demonstrated last week with a letter, didn't we, that the how is an important way to get to the why, and to sort of change our language a bit in that respect. I've been meaning to for a while anyway, have just a section on the website that's about kit. But it will be, of course, the way that I would review kit, which will not be very technical. If there is a lot of technical stuff in there, you know that I will probably get a nosebleed. So it'll be my touchy-feely how I felt when I was piloting command of certain bits of kit. There's 2 cameras to start with. The GR3 review is there, and also the Leica X2, that's there. Coming up, there's a bag and there's a tripod that I've been promising for so long. And then I think I might delve inside the bag. I might even include some audio kit and stuff that makes this ship float, as it were. So that link is there now, and I'd welcome your comments too, because you may have used some of the kit that I loosely, inverted commas, review. Well, they're quite long pieces, actually, having said that, and there's photographs alongside it as well, of course, as you would expect, particularly when talking about cameras. But I'd welcome your thoughts, your feedback, if you've used some of the kit that I review, because you will have your very own feelings, and I'd be really interested to hear them. As always, show address for your letters, for your thoughts, for your pictures is stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. Right. Where should we start with the letters this week? It's a well-travelled show this week. We're going to start with Jay Illage from the East, which actually might not be the East, depending upon where you live in the world. It could be the North or the West. Dearest Neil and Barnes, Barkalot Jay will be thrilled that he's included in the letters. He has suggested to me, in my imagination, of course, that pictures of 4-legged photo walkers would be very good for a website feature. Leave it with you. Over the last several months, says Jay, I've been catching up on previous instalments of the show whilst walking with my own pair of woofers. And I was particularly interested in hearing about the Swedish notion of the right to wander and explore freely, as you so articulately referenced in episode 296. Jay, I've been accused of many things. Being articulate is certainly not one of them. Yes, here in South China, where I live, says Jay, the concept of walking freely outdoors has felt very much subjective. Just a bit of background, by the way, if you're thinking, what is Jay talking about? We went through a period of time where we seemed to talk about nothing else. And I got very upset about don't walk here signs, so much so that the complaints desk got busy and I had to sort of pare back slightly on the on that subject within the show. But yes, we were talking about now I'm going to get this wrong now, Allemansratten, which my pronunciation's shady at best, I'm sure, but in essence it was this freedom. It's a Scandic sort of notion of freedom to roam and walk across land, as long as you respect it. And there are caveats to that understanding. But I just think it's a fantastic idea because, I mean, I know sometimes you come across land where clearly you can't walk. The edge of Salisbury Downs, which is close-ish to me, if you see a red flag, that usually means munitions are being fired. Probably not a great time to claim your right to roam. Other, I suppose, farming reasons, etc. I mean, you don't want to walk across freshly sowed fields, do you? That would be ridiculous. But apart from that, yeah, sometimes you go to woodland and you think, this is something that so many other people could enjoy if only they were given access. Anyway, that's what Jay's referring to here. Unlike many parts of the world, says Jay, here in China, the borders have only recently opened up after enduring close to 3 years of restrictions and lockdowns and constant tests and health codes, plus a lot more happenings with far darker undertones, best probably left unmentioned. Outdoors, the majority of people are still wearing face masks, even though the rules have mostly been relaxed about such. And it feels we've just become, used to the last 3 years. That was something, Jay, that I feared, that we might become used to restrictions and it would be some kind of just new reality, he says, sounding all conspiracy-led. Freedom, says Jay, is something most of us take for granted, but there are still many people around the world who unfortunately cannot. I blather on about all this in my lead up to show you a photograph I took recently while on a long weekend photo jolly with a Czech friend of mine. As you can see, most apartment buildings and houses here have security bars on all the windows, which can make one feel like somewhat of a prisoner in your own home. These bars are apparently to stop, both stop intruders coming in and to stop the insiders jumping out. I saw this gentleman in this picture relaxing in the midday sun, seated out comfortably on his balcony, but the feeling it left me with just made my heart sink a little. Perhaps in some people's minds, and as the amazing Janis Joplin sang, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Thank you so much for giving us all a wonderful and thought-provoking show. You're so kind, Jay, to wander along to. And if you might be looking for a photographer who has a pure gift for blessing his images with a real sense of story, then Anton Custers is a firm favourite of mine. And I've got the link. I shall put it on the show page. All the very best from Jay Illidge. I've got your Instagram as well, and I'll make sure I pop that on the show page alongside this picture. P.S. If you want to do a retreat to Hong Kong, I'd be honoured to show you around. It's a landscape and street photography mecca with the most amazing food to boot, I have no doubt. Our good friend, Andrew Hardacre, our extra miler, Andrew Hardacre, has shared many pictures from Hong Kong. It looks a fabulous place, Jay. Consider it a date if I make it over. And, as for this picture, where do I start? I showed it to Sam, and she said, "Is that a prison? It's a very funny-shaped prison." I said, "No, it's where people live." I didn't give her any story behind it. I didn't read her your words. I simply showed her the picture, and that was that was her first response. They were her first words. "Is that a prison?" That picture, I think, is a very, very potent picture and certainly supports the words within your story. I'll pop it on the show page, as I said, and if you have any comments to make about the picture, please join in with the comments on the show page just below. Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much. And yes, if I make it to Hong Kong, it is one of the pins on my map. It's the must-visit colour pin. Then Hong Kong is certainly one of those places I'd love to go and visit. Oh, it doesn't know what it wants to do today, this weather. 1 minute, blowing an absolute hoolie. Next moment, calm. Almost like a microclimate as I walk along this path. Oh, it's wonderful to see snowdrops are coming out here. I tell you what, this bit that I'm walking through here, there's a neat path that cuts straight through it, so I won't feel guilty about walking on any of them. I know they're hardier than I previously thought, but all the same, this is going to be like a carpet. If I come back in about, a week, 2 weeks, I don't know, might just have to keep coming up here with Sir Barkalot. This should look very different. What a photograph this is going to make, truly. So thank you, Jay, for your missive from China. Shall we go to France next? Let's whiz over to France, one of my favourite countries on earth. Here is Matau Chauveau. Hello, Neil. Or do I pronounce it Matthew? Is it Matau? Neil. Get a shovel. Here we go. I listened to episode 367 the other day, and Tim Booth's interview inspired me to share my own Show of Hands project. Yes, Show of Hands. Oh, what a project. Neil, are you going to repeat the project? Do you mind if I praise it just a little bit? I might have a new other listener, and they may feel a bit left out if they don't understand it. Essentially, here goes. Prayseed version. Show of Hands is a project by the amazing photographer Tim Booth, who one day was photographing his grandmother's hands. They were very arthritic. She wasn't very pleased about the photograph, but when he looked back at this extremely contrasty picture, he thought, well, that's my grandma. These are her hands, the hands that have shaped her life, and I suppose to an extent his own too. And he set about this glorious project across many, many years, decades, wasn't it? Photographing hands. Some rich and famous hands, some not so rich and famous. Hands of craftspeople, hands of musicians, hands of sports people. It's a marvellous book. It's amazing. And so that's Show of Hands. Matthew says, as a documentary family photographer, documenting my own daughter growing up was a given. I've been spending the last 3.5 years crouching and crawling to try and capture life from her point of view. I also quickly realised that photographing her hands was a good way to show how she experimented with new things, how she connected with her new world. I also love revisiting old photos from 1 or 2 years ago to see how much she's changed. See the ones with the piano. Yes, you can. It seems cliche to say that they grow up so fast, but man, they grow up so fast. Here is a selection from my Hands project. Feel free to share them with other walkers. Or are they walkies or walklings? I don't know. We've never really established, have we, what the expression is. We have the other listener, yes, but we're not walkers, because walkers is from The Walking Dead, isn't it? And I don't like to think of you and I as zombies walking along our paths and treks and making photographs. The rest of my work can be seen on my website. Thank you for walking with us every week, rain or shine, Neil. Oh, you're welcome. And snow. Don't forget the snow. Sometimes a bit of ice. I know, Kelly, not as cold as it is in your part of the land, he says, just rescuing himself, or your part of the world. Valerie Jardin, actually, I don't know. I'm sure I did talk to Valerie about her Hands project while I think about it, Matthew. I'm reading this letter before I've edited Valerie's chat with me, but I'm sure I did. I'll link to her Hands project on the show page for you. Note to self. But for the moment, let me play you a few words from Tim Booth's episode. Matthew, it's a great idea, I think, a focused portrait project in many ways. Can you imagine the legacy that she will have as she grows up? Not just pictures of her blowing out the candles on a cake. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, rescuing himself for the second time in as many minutes. But to have extra stories, and this is a story, alongside if you like, the staple diet of the pictures that we make as our children grow up. Oh, fantastic, really is. Anyway, sorry, back to Tim Booth. In the episode was a conversation I was so looking forward to having, and it is the conversation about his grandmother.
I was driving past my grandmother's house, so I popped in to say hello, and I had my camera with me because I always have a camera with me. And it was spring, so we were sitting outside in her garden chatting. And while we were chatting, she always used to sit with her hands resting on her stick in front of her on the garden bench, and she had very, very arthritic hands. So they were, they looked like gnarled old roots, and they were resting on her stick. So I picked up my camera. I had my 55 macro on at the time, and I took a picture just of her hands. I didn't really think much about it, but when I got home and processed it, it really struck a chord with me for some reason. To me, it summed up my grandmother, who'd been quite a force in my life. We'd lived with her for a while, and so she'd sort of been through the whole doing school runs and all that kind of stuff. So she was very involved in our life. And I thought this picture was just her, and it would be my sort of enduring memory of her. And I did that and thought, gosh, well, I wonder whether there are other people whose hands will sort of sum up or encapsulate, or that I can shoot them in a way that they do, that person's life. And it just made me start thinking about hands, and that was it. I was sort of, that one photograph just kicked off a whole project that, I'd never planned to do at all. People were intrigued, certainly, but also it was a great door opener, because asking someone famous if you can photograph them is quite tricky. But if you just say, I want to photograph your hands, then two things. One, suddenly you're not just after some portrait that you want to flog off to the newspaper. You're obviously doing something that is more meaningful. And two, you're recognizing them for what they do. And with famous people, we're so hung up on faces and, you know, Hello Magazine and, well, nowadays social media, that you're often not looking at the fact that these people have really dedicated enormous amounts of time and effort and skill to what they do. Yet we just look at their face and go, oh, look, there's someone famous. This was celebrating their achievements. So I think it was much easier to get in those days. Also, there were a lot less photographers about back in the 80s than there are now. Everyone calls himself a photographer now.
Tim Booth, absolute joy. I know I say that a lot. I'll keep saying it. I don't care. Unashamedly. It was a joy to talk with Tim. And I very much hope that I'll talk with him again in the future. And that leads nicely into saying here is a guest today that you've heard before and you'll hear again. Because I like this idea of having friends that we sometimes turn to. It's a bit like going down cafe. I don't know why I've gone into northern cultural appropriation. I do apologise there. But it is a bit like going into the cafe, isn't it? With your friends. Come on, Sean. Let's go have a coffee. Have a chinwag, as they say. I wanted to talk to Sean about his new publishing project in the hope that it might inspire, well, me, for one, because I need a bit of inspiration too, you know, but inspire you as well to think about publishing your own work and your own stories and your adventures. Particularly pertinent with a letter I'm yet to read you today, which are just honestly, all letters are fantastic. This one in particular, it took my breath away. Probably because of a conversation I've been having recently with extra milers. But plus I'm going to surprise Sean at the end of the conversation with a question that I think I think the questions will become their own holiday special this year. You know the one. Is it the why question, Neil? It just could be. Here is the philosophical YouTuber, Sean Tucker, who, like us, you and I, on this show, understands the importance of the why of photography. Sean, your latest film at the time of us recording this is called Photography and Your Mental Health. It's one of our pet subjects, as you well know, and a core belief on this show, the sort of if you like, the partnership of mental health and making pictures. How did you meet the focus of your film, Pete Wands? Because I so love these films where you're showcasing the work of, I don't want to say unknowns because that sounds unfair and unkind, but not necessarily household names.
I mean, I deliberately choose photographers who aren't as well known just because I feel like if I go to the big names, and I probably, at this stage, I might be able to get some of the big names. You would, yeah. But I just feel like they've told their story so many times that I'm just repeating what they've already said. And I don't trust myself to come up with a completely different angle on it. So for me, I think it's always more interesting to tell a new story. Yeah. So I always want to find photographers who haven't necessarily told their story 1,000 times on YouTube videos or podcasts or whatever else. And it challenges me as a filmmaker. And I'm always staggered anew that, like, every time I go into one of these, that everyone has a great story. You know, I was going with a little bit of trepidation on the day, going like, this could be a boring one, but it never is. It's always great and it's always different, which is cool.
Do you do a lot of research into them before you go, or because I know what I'm like, I have reams of information and research, and sometimes probably too much, because that you need to find out what somebody's story is. And if you research too heavily, it's almost like you march in with a script.
Yeah, it's like that documentary problem, isn't it? You can't go in with the answers, you got to go in with the questions. So I feel like I try not to over prepare. I definitely do my due diligence and look through all their images and check out their website and different people they've worked with, and a little bit, if they've got interviews out there, I'll listen to them. But I feel like if I just have the right questions, it's nice to have the happy accidents on the day. And the questions always change. Like, I've got my little notebook with the neat questions written out, and by the end of the session, it's just a bunch of scribble because we've taken left turns all over the place, which was Pete, by the way. I didn't know, although Pete was very prepared. Like, he already knew exactly what he wanted to say. And you'll appreciate this as an audio guy. He's got this incredibly deep, sonorous Scottish voice.
Yes, yeah.
That it was a nightmare to mix for, because that bass just sat below the music that sometimes comes in over the top, I had to literally pull all the bass down and put the treble up. So whatever you hear in the video, his voice is way deeper than that. It's ridiculous. But yeah, he was great. He was great. And he just took this tangent on, like, actually, photography for me is about having a decompression valve. I have a very stressful job as a doctor, and I'm a father in a young family, and I need to get out and do this. And it resonated with me when he said it, because it's one of the things I hear all the time. I'm sure you do too, where people will say something like, photography for me is a bit of a meditation.
Yes. Yeah.
And everyone who says it to me, I'm like, everyone says that. It's amazing how often I hear that, and they look shocked. Oh, that's true for other people too. I'm like, everybody. I think we all use it this way, and it does have these mental health benefits, but we're not necessarily comparing notes and realizing that actually you could do that consciously, because we all do that. We all have that in common. So he told a great story around that.
Do you think you're more interested in photographers who aren't necessarily full-time photographers, that have a life story away from holding a camera in their hand?
I feel like it's more accessible for the people who watch my channel. A lot of the people who watch the channel are young photographers wanting to become photographers, trying to work out if they can make it a job, or if they want to make it a part-time job, or just keep it as a hobby. If I only interview photographers who've hit that sweet spot, that tiny 1% that have made it their full-time career and they're constantly in demand, making a lot of money, it's not necessarily the most relatable story. Whereas if you talk to somebody like Pete, who's not really making a lot of money out of his photography, and he's got a full-time day job, and he's a busy family guy, still trying to carve out space to do it, that's a very relatable story for everybody. So I am quite purposeful about people who are hustling in lots of different ways to try and make it work. And my favorites are the ones who are kind of like, it might not work, but I'm having a load of fun doing it, because that's the most relatable story possible.
I know your answer is going to be no, but do you look at their socials, their popularity within social media?
It's not about followers for me. It really isn't. Like, no. I know photographers with very small followings who are far more talented than I am. And I know people with much bigger followings than me who I really just don't rate their photography, to be honest. It's really not about that. I think there are some people out there who are just gems, who like, when people actually see what they're doing, they're like, wow, how don't we know about this? Those are my favorites to do. Those people whose Instagrams blow up the next day because of a film we made together, and they get affirmation, good eyeballs on their work. Pete's messaged me this morning going, I've just been flooded with like wonderful affirming messages and comments, and it just feels amazing. I'm like, it's all you, man. It's all your images. I can't make you look better than you do. The music picks up at the end, and it shows a slideshow of your images, and take all the credit for yourself. And that makes me feel amazing to be able to do that for people.
I really like the way that you said, I won't be able to do it word for word, but you suggested, look, I'm going to show the images at the end because I want you to listen to his story, and I don't want anything to interrupt that story. And I thought, oh, that's really good. I must steal that.
People don't like it, though. People get really cross.
Really?
If you go back on any of those documentaries I've done, there are always a few comments with people going like, I'm 10 minutes into this video and I haven't seen a single image yet.
Oh.
Like, well, but that's why. Because if I show you the images at the start, you'll be like, oh, these are nice. But if I let Pete tell you his story, and you understand who he is as a person, and we get to the end of that film, where I'm always trying to land on an emotional note.
Yes.
Where you can feel how important this is to him or whoever I'm interviewing, and pick the music up. Then when I show you those images, they'll make you want to cry. That's a different thing. And let yourself go on that journey. It's going to take a bit of patience, which I know isn't popular on YouTube, but strap in, take the journey, be patient with it. I promise you it'll land hard. Like the classic for me is always Fiona Lark's video. That's the one I always think about, because, you know, you're listening to this woman talk about her journey with photography, which is a really deep one. You're listening to her talk. You're not seeing any of the images yet. You're just hearing her talk about them. And at the end, she ends on this note like, I'm not sure. It's something like, I'm not sure I've taken any good images yet, but I hope to one day. I lift the music up in the background and show you her images, and everyone's in floods of tears, because it's like, how can't you see how brilliant you are? But if I showed you her images at the start, that wouldn't have landed that way. You have to have it in that order, and you have to have a bit of patience for it to hit you like that. It's editing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is, but I appreciated the patience thing particularly. It's true of YouTube that that the audiences aren't necessarily the most patient. Although with some channels, I would imagine they're more... your channel must be one of them, where people understand what they're consuming, don't they?
You live in hope.
You've been through, talking of Pete Wands, and I'll link to the film, of course. You've been through your own experience of what Pete describes within the film, Sean. Being out with a camera, finding peace, finding solace. Your solace, your peace came during that time. You were living in, you're still there, living in York, near York, and walking down, I think it was a towpath, wasn't it? Walking next to a river. We'll come to the magazine in a moment. I promise we'll get there. But that solace you found at an unfamiliar place at the time, at a particularly strange juncture of your life, didn't you? And it was refreshingly honest when you were talking about that. What's life like now? Are you any closer to the Sean you hoped to find when you moved to Yorkshire?
I feel like there's still a lot in flux, really. I haven't landed where I want to land yet. We always underestimate how long change takes, I think. And I've learned to be more patient with myself and how things transition over the years. Yeah, and I guess, I mean, what you're referring to, obviously, like beginning of 2021 with my wife leaving and then going through a divorce and moving to York, being stuck in an Airbnb for 6 weeks while the house was finished. So I was literally just surrounded by boxes in an Airbnb on my own in a new place where I didn't know anyone. Was a tough 6 weeks. But yeah, those daily walks, getting out the house, it didn't have to be photography for me. It just had to be getting out the house and walking. I'm a massive advocate of, if you're a welter of emotions and you can't really work out what's going on, go for a long walk and do it every day until you start to work it out, because it just fires up your subconscious mind. I mean, the way I actually talk about it in the book, where I sort of talk about, I think our unconscious minds are a lot better at processing problems. They're a lot more creative. So we will often sit and we call it racking our brains, like medieval repetitive torture device, trying to come up with a solution to a problem we have. But all we're doing is forcing the same thought channels, trying to come up with different solutions, and that obviously doesn't work. But then you just decide to give up on that for now and you go for a walk, and then suddenly the solution presents itself. And I think that happens because our subconscious mind goes to work instead, and it often moves in more supple, interesting ways. So I think photography, and I think that's the reason photography as a mental health thing is so good for people, because it is an opportunity to quieten down that loud conscious mind by giving yourself a practical thing to do while you're out and about. The subconscious mind goes to work and processes a lot of that stuff you're really struggling to process. And that's the value for me. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Parable. I'm not sure you can see them. Oh no, they're there. If I move to my right, you might be able to see but they're the small white ones just there. This means
love it.
Absolutely nothing to those listening on radio, as we used to say. But the collections, which I've collected your collection, but things have changed. You've gone away from collecting to become a Parable. Why Parable? I mean, I know Parable has something to do with your past.
So the collections were 90 images a year in the book.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be wherever I was, whatever I saw that year. There was no theme to it. There was no message in it. There was no real... I mean, obviously, I tried to sequence them as best I could, so there was some flow in it, but there wasn't any narrative or anything like that. No. And that was fine. I enjoyed doing it and did it for 5 years. But I just felt like I need to grow up as a photographer, and that was the next step to grow up, was to give myself a more focus challenge, to go out and shoot around a theme, to try and have a message, something to put across that was more deliberate and more intentional. So Parable for me was a way of going, if I don't want to do these collections anymore and I want to do something that's more focused, I'm going to be frank, I'm not ready for a fancy monographed book. I'm not ready for my first photography book. I just don't have the work. But I can do a magazine where I give myself the challenge of writing and shooting photographs in a particular vein to say a particular thing. And the Parable link obviously comes from my time with the church, because a parable, loosely speaking, it's a story or an illustration or an analogy offered to talk about a deeper spiritual truth. So the first parable is about window light. So I start talking about light falling through windows as a photographer, and then move on to talking about, well, window and aperture are a synonym. They're synonyms of each other. So it's also light falling through the little window in our lens onto a sensor at the back and capturing that light. To move through to talk about deeper things and talking about, we also need to flood light into our interiors. We're back to mental health. How do we in dark times make sure we're drawing light in and focusing light onto other people's lives as well? What does it look like to do that? So I'm showing you some of my favorite images I've taken with window light, so that on the surface, all the photographers are happy we got some images. And then I'm talking about something that I think is far more important and taking you on a journey. So each edition will be a version of that. It will start with the photography thing. I'll show you a bunch of images and hopefully land at a deeper philosophical, spiritual, psychological truth of some sort that's interesting to me. I mean, I've taken a very similar tack in some videos, like the Protect Your Highlights, Embrace Your Shadows videos, which I've done. People kind of know that formula from me.
Had you not produced The Meaning in the Making, perhaps you wouldn't be at Parable now. Maybe you'd still be making collections.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, because the biggest part for me was holding them in each hand, going, I've got this one book which is all words, it's all written. And on the other hand, I've got this book which is all images. How do I bring these skills together to create something richer?
Yeah.
And to also give myself the challenge to do that. So that's definitely how it came about.
It's interesting. I think you mentioned it twice, maybe 3 times, and you've mentioned it just now. Actually, growing up. Do you mean a maturing of your images, or a maturing of style, or just a maturing of you understanding your creativity? If that doesn't sound too woo woo.
Yeah. It's not style, because I feel like I have a style.
Yeah.
I almost feel like I need less style, if I'm honest.
Right.
That sometimes you can have that style over substance problem.
Yeah. But
some of my favorite and most compelling images are from photographers who weren't trying to be stylistic. I mean, I love Joel Meyrowitz's work, who you've had on the show. Yeah. Like, it's not his style that gets me. It's his point of view. And I think that runs through, his 35mm street shots in New York, to his, Cape Light stuff, to his beautiful large format portraits, to still life in Tuscany. Like, it doesn't matter what he's shooting. It's that he's trying to say something in each, or shots of himself on his phone during lockdown. Yeah. It's his eye I want. It's his view of the world. So I feel like growing up now, we all do it, and there's nothing wrong with this. I think it's the trajectory's right, that we start out going, how do we create something that will stand out? So we work out what camera we need, or what lens makes us look good, or what technique will impress people, or what colors we edit with, and that will people love. And then we get to a point and go, yeah, all the surface stuff looks glitzy, and it really impresses the beginners, but it's a bit empty. That's how I feel for myself. So how do I now start saying something with what I'm doing and pocket the style a little bit? I'm not throwing it away. I built something I like the look of. So it will definitely be a theme or a vein that runs through everything. But it's got to start to become more about what it means and what I'm trying to say than single standalone images that are popular. It's
interesting that you should mention that this sort of singularity way of thinking, and Joel Meyerowitz just a moment ago, because one thing I discovered during my research of Joel and my conversation with him, was that a lot of those single images, later on in life, he discovered, I've actually got collections. I have actually got bodies of work through something I wasn't quite expecting. I wonder if Sean Tucker of the future will find that that's the same for you.
I'm already doing it, to be honest. So obviously with Parable out now and having to do, I promised 2 editions minimum a year. I'll try and do more. Yeah. The first thing I did was to put together folders on my desktop with themes that I could think about covering. And I've got a folder with 40 folders in it with 40 different themes that I'm adding to all the time. And some of those folders already have images in it, because you're right. I have shot a lot of work. So I've already been shooting some of that work that I just haven't put into that theme. And some of those folders are empty because I have to give myself the assignment to go out and get that work. So it's definitely, it's both, there's been no wasted time. But I'm just being more intentional about how I go forward.
And I really like that idea, actually, that you're commissioning yourself, which is quite a fun way to work as a photographer, isn't it? No matter whether you're professional or hobbyist or amateur, or whatever moniker you want to attach to that, is giving yourself challenges to go out and shoot something. What are the empty folders? I'm intrigued.
What are the themes?
Yeah, what are the themes of some of the empty folders?
What have I got? Gosh, I mean, I can look it up for you.
Yeah.
Where is it?
I'm intrigued to know what lies there. I'm giving away everything that's coming up. Just give us one then. Don't do too many.
I mean, let's see. What have I got? So some of them are places. Yeah. Like I've been spending a lot of time in Whitby and Scarborough, so there might be some interesting stuff to do that's place focused, which could talk about different things as well. But also where I live, there are some really interesting different like landscape aspects. And I'm not a landscape photographer, but things like I did one about, or I've got a folder here about people who do dry stone walling. It's a lost art. Yeah. They do a lot around here. So what could I make that look good? Could I get some interviews and make that look good? The kind of ruins of farmhouses you get around here, the old abbeys that sit in the middle of a field. Like there's lots of things that kind of spark your imagination about that. And then I've got some stuff which, you know, you'd expect me to do. So I want to do one on shadows. Just shadows, because I know exactly what I want to say in that one as well, and I know how I want to talk about it. Nighttime photography in cities. There's one I'd love to do on Rome, because Rome's become a favorite city to shoot in. So there's like a ton of different stuff sitting in there that's hopefully quite varied. Each one will feel very different, which is a nice challenge to give yourself.
You mentioned singularity of images, and I wonder, sorry, just rewinding a bit, whether Instagram has taught us to think like that as creatives. That you're not. I wonder, actually, do you think an audience out there might understand, an Instagram audience that is? Do you think we could find an Instagram audience that might understand a sequenced or maybe episodic Instagram feed? I don't know if there's any out there that work that way.
It just doesn't work, unfortunately, because people don't visit your feed that much. They just visit their own feed, and they get given whatever comes down the pipe amidst everyone else's shots of their puppies and lunches and the beach holiday. So to get that episodic thing, you have to go visit a photographer's profile and spend time on their individual feed. And because we know that not many people do that, I just don't feel like it's ever going to be the right platform for that sort of thing, unfortunately.
That's a shame. I don't know of any. Well, there are two ways you can buy the magazine. There is the hard copy version, which you mentioned actually is the way you'd prefer people to consume it. It's on wonderful uncoated paper. I love uncoated paper, and I share that passion that you have for the shadows disappearing off into uncoated paper production. But also, and this one instantly played to my spirit, there's an audio book alongside I'm going to call it an audio book, an audio feed if you like, alongside the pictures. Why have you decided to do it two different ways? Possibly three, actually.
Well, it's a very practical answer. It might be a bit boring, but sales of the collections took an absolute nosedive after Brexit went through, because I could no longer ship to Europe, because the book was £20. You know, then you have to pay £10 or whatever it is for track shipping, and then it would get stuck at the post office in somewhere in Europe, anywhere in Europe, and they would have to come down to the post office and pay another £20 to pick up the book. So for a £20 book, they were paying £50, and of course, all of Europe went, just forget about it. We can't do this anymore. No. So going forward, which is why I digitized all the collections, which I said I'd never do, but it was the only way people could get them, really. And why I just decided the magazines going forward would also be available digitally. So if you were ordering from Europe, until we sort our act out in this country and we can actually ship without huge punitive costs, they have a way to get it that's practical. I would have just done print, honestly, but there is also something about the fact that it existing digitally means it kind of exists forever, because I used to do limited print runs of the collections, which some years went very fast, and that meant people could never get it. Now you can always get it, which is kind of a nice thing. And I thought the PDF audio bundle would be a nice experience, because you can actually, you know, pop it on and have me reading it to you while you flick through. Would be a slightly different experience, which could be fun. Well,
I listened to when I got it, I listened to your audio feed before I looked at the PDF. So I did it in an about face way, and I did that almost, I did do it purposefully, because I thought, I wonder if I listen to it as a story, whether it'll be a bit like when you read the book and then you watch the film and think, okay, now I'm seeing that now. I've heard. And I thought it worked really very well. I listened to you in the bath. I'm not sure if you want that bit of information. but but it worked. I thought it worked really well.
Oh, that's good to hear. Cheers. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. It's a nice writing exercise. You know, I used to, years ago, especially when I left the church, when I was leaving the church, I used to write a blog. And I remember that being quite a cool thing, you know, every week trying to put out a blog post. There was a couple of thousand words. And I've kind of missed that, those sort of short to medium form writing exercises on a theme that you can put out. So this feels like getting back to that in a slightly richer way.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it worked very well. You mentioned two other magazines, actually, Serial and Rucksack. Mm-hmm. They were Now, I've heard of Serial. I hadn't heard of Rucksack, and I wonder why I hadn't, because when I went to look at it, I thought, look at that. Serial is biannual. I'm not sure about Rucksack. They are both inspirations to you, aren't they?
Just in terms of paper choice, Rucksack maybe a little bit on the design side, although I've definitely veered off from them, and I'm not a designer, so it won't look as good as either. It'll look as good as I can make it. But yeah, it's to do with that paper choice. I think I needed to justify it to myself. I mean, you'll get this with your love of uncoated paper. It really does turn the blacks to charcoal, and it will mute all the colors, which I had very, very few, but I did have a couple of complaints from people who got the collections going, this isn't print quality. I'm like, yeah, that's because you have to buy the print for print quality. This isn't, it's not a book of prints, like it's its own thing. I personally love the look of it. I feel like it gets this slightly faded filmic look when you print on uncoated, and I love the feel in the hand. So Serial and Rucksack both gave me the kind of permission. There's another one called Earnest Journal. Those sort of three in my head, so it gave me permission to go that uncoated paper choice and embrace what it does to the images, because if legitimate quality publications are doing it, so can I.
Earnest Journal, is that photographic or not necessarily?
Yeah, it's a mix of, it's sort of travel, photojournalistic,
We share a word, Sean, with our channels, as a word often mentioned, and on yours, and it's mentioned on mine, and that is why. The why over the how. I think a why can be an ever-changing thing, and I wonder just finally, has your why changed across the years? I mean, if I asked you what your why is today, what would it be, and has it changed?
I don't think it's changed. It's definitely refined itself. I'm clearer. And I'm more specific about what I'm trying to do now. I think before I started my channel at the beginning going, I want to help and I want to target photographers. I was clear from day one that it wasn't just a photography channel. The trailer says as much right back from those early days, that I want it to be as much about life as the discipline of photography. But I think as I go forward and writing the meaning in the making was a turning point for me, I realized I do want to lean in harder and harder to how can we talk together about a good life philosophy around creativity, and creativity that broadly, not just photography specifically. So I'd love it to end, and I mean, all the ones where I'm, sitting waffling away on my couch, those videos, that philosophical playlist on my channel is for everybody. It's not just for photographers. And I do get messages from a lot of people going, I've never touched a camera, but I watched that playlist because that's the one that connects to me. And I think I know it will lose viewers and it has lost subscribers because I am leaning into that, but it will also refine down that audience to the people who really care and consolidate that, which I'm interested in, because I'll do the odd tutorial here and there because I still enjoy doing them. But I want to lean into documentaries with other photographers and artists down in the long run. And to me, sitting and talking about those things that I think are a little deeper and require a bit more patience, but really are hopefully meaningful to that group of people. It's to help people get a handle on their lives. That's the why. And I know when I do that. I know I've had messages today. I had a very sweet guy saying, I hope you know what you do, what it means to us, that I've really been struggling. You got me through this patch of time. You something you said landed this way and it totally changed how I thought about this and got me out of a dark hole. That's me motivated for a year when I hit those emails or messages. And so that's the why. Photography has always been a bit of a Trojan horse for me. And I'm not embarrassed about that. I've been honest about it the whole time. And I'm very happy to teach photography, but I care about other stuff more. And so I'll keep doing both, but leaning more into that. How can I help?
Sean Tucker. My thanks to Sean, and undoubtedly you'll hear more from Sean across the year. I did suggest that because I want to. I'm heading Yorkshire way because there's a few photo stories I'd like to make and friends I'd really like to touch base with. And so I said to Sean, would you go for a walk one day? Should we do one of the in-person walking episodes? And so that may be soon. I'm looking for pictures today that are, I suppose, delicate in nature. I haven't really got a great macro lens with me or anything, so getting really close is tricky. But I'm on the X100V, and I'm using it's popping in and out at the moment, the sun. Let's come out of the ND filter. 1000th f2. This lichen is lovely. There we go. That's my collection of delicate pictures. Well, delicate for me, at any rate. There are 2 photo walks of a week now. There's the Friday one, the one we're on right now. I don't listen to it on a Friday, Neil. Okay, it's a Saturday one. I don't listen on a Saturday. Well, whatever day you listen to it on. Why are you being so awkward? Yeah, there's this one. Neil, are you arguing with yourself again? Yes. You see, when Barney's with me, I sort of chatter with him, don't I? Now I'm chattering with my imaginary, my other listener. Oh, that'll get us in trouble. Yes, there's this one. And then there's the Wednesday one. The extra mile for those who support the show with a modest investment, either monthly or annual. Without you, the show just would not be what it is, certainly not where it is, and probably not as often as it is. No, scratch that. Definitely not as often as it is. So thank you. You're very much part of my team, along with our precious sponsors, mpb.com, because a program like this is, I know I say it regularly, but it's a full production. And we meet once a month too for our InVision show on Zoom. We have our own guest speakers, questions from my roll of 12, and an invite to share the pictures that you've been making. Actually, the next guest speaker, if you're listening to this in the correct order, in the correct month, and possibly the correct day, is going to be a good friend of the show, Paul Hudson, who's talking about, well, finding Timbuktu. But yeah, that's our next. He is our next guest speaker
on this week's Extra Mile.
It's Extra Mile 28. Don't you know there are hundreds of other episodes or bits of audio to listen to and things to read, but the Extra Mile is now 28 episodes old. And in Extra Mile 28, we're going to tread or tiptoe carefully, not through the tulips, there's a musical memory, but the complaints department.
It brought back memories when I was very young, and this to me was a symbol of somewhat the beginning of a fight.
We find out about Saudi Arabian photography with an extra miler from the country.
And I use Google Maps to hunt for very old deserted neighborhoods, even outside Riyadh, and drive all the way there and take photos of them.
And there are some extra moments with former guests Adrian Arbib and Simon Lister from last week, and Sean Tucker is challenged to answer questions from our roll of 12.
So for me, I guess my camera was a passport into that community for a few days.
You can become an extra miler by clicking on the support the show icon on the front of the website, photowalk.show. And thank you to all of you and all of those who are making this show a weekly adventure with our cameras, including our friends at MPB.
For quality used and inspected photo and video kit with a 6-month guarantee upon what you buy, visit mpb.com.
Now, he says, with a slight ellipsis, would that be a 2-dot one, Neil, or a 3-dot? I think a 2-dot. We use the 2-dot in this one, he says, sounding like he's just grabbed a club from the linguistic golf bag. All our letters bring something very important to this title, or show, or project, or audio book, or however you like to feel this show connects with you. And it's interesting that Sean should mention that many of his viewers on his YouTube channel aren't necessarily from a photographic background when they contact him, because that's something that I've noticed here with the letters that you send in to, I'll remind you, stories photowalk.show. And smartphones count, by the way. I know sometimes I've had letters where people say, I'm not really a photographer. I bet you've got a smartphone. Oh, yeah, I've got one of those. Does it take pictures? Oh, yeah, Neil, it does. Yeah, quite good ones, actually. Well, there we go. Here is a letter from Patricia Langer, who is one of our very special extra milers. And actually, it's a subject that's been mentioned on both this Friday Photo Walk show and the midweek extra mile. Although it's, I suppose, become more personal with my extra mile edition a couple of shows ago, number 26, the edition called Finding Mum, which is where I made it's a pilgrimage. Really, in all respects, to the far end of the county of Kent to find my birth mother's grave and pay respects to her. Truth be told, I had no idea what to expect, photographically or mentally. And I did ponder for a while on whether I should, whether it should be truly private or maybe I could take you along with me as some kind of, and I mean this genuinely, some kind of moral support. I think you've already identified today that radio, podcasting, audio, photography, they are emotional. Is it the right expression? Emotional crutches. They lift me up. Q song. Those moments where I'm feeling particularly vulnerable, I suppose would be the best way to describe it. And if it is true that we share a little or lot of ourselves when making our pictures, and in my case making my programs, well, this certainly was my most personal moment with a camera shared, I think. So I come to this story, this letter, with very potent pictures that I will share on the website today from Patricia Langer. Good morning, Neil. When is a photo story too personal? Patricia asks. Only I've been thinking about your podcast, Finding Mum. Your willingness to share your journey has led me to think about both the inner and outer journeys we take in our lives that were initiated by an early story about who we are. Because we carry these first stories throughout our lives, they eventually propel us onto a journey or a central quest for an answer, a person, maybe a resolution. Of course, if one has a creative soul, the quest itself eventually demands expression through our creative vehicle, be it writing or photography, painting, that sort of thing. And the story finds a life all of its own. Joseph Campbell, who I'll link to on the show page today, wrote about something called the hero's journey. He explained that this is the obligation of the hero on returning from his or her quest to share the experience in story with the people of her village, town or tribe. The journey is not complete until it's given form in story and shared. Now, I'll share a link about Joseph Campbell. I found a film as well, actually, so I'll pop a film in the film reference part of the show page down at the bottom as well. Oh, you will go on definitely this is a rabbit warren moment. Not just a rabbit hole, but an entire warren. To take a step back, says Patricia, during the week before you posted Finding Mum, I've been thinking about emailing you actually with this question: when is a photo story too personal? I've been thinking about a photographic project, you see, that I've been picking away at for over 30 years. I've let it slide too many times because of my concern about it being, too personal. And being so, whether people might not be able to relate to it or even want to. So let me give you the backstory behind my photo in brackets quest. I met my parents when I was 6 years old. They'd left me behind in Cape Breton with my maternal grandparents when I was but a few months old. They settled in Toronto and my grandparents raised me in Cape Breton. My grandparents and I moved to Toronto when I was 6. Nana and Pops were to live with my aunts and I was supposed to go and live with my parents eventually. Though this never happened because in the winter of that year, I was diagnosed with tuberculosis and put in a sanatorium for a year and a half. And here is the event that later catapulted me then into a photo quest. Toward the end of the 18 months, the doctors approached my grandmother and told her that they'd have to do something drastic. What exactly was drastic remains unclear. but it was to save one of my lungs. Now, I don't know whether they planned on removing the lung or just collapsing it. But my Irish Catholic grandmother would have none of it. She insisted the doctors do nothing for 2 weeks, and then she took her own drastic measures. Nana persuaded her eldest son, my Uncle Gord, to drive her to Quebec, to 2 healing shrines. He only agreed because my grandmother had convinced my Aunt Melly to give Gord her brand new car. Must be very convincing. Nan was heading to the shrine of St. Anne de Beaupré, the patron saint of grandmothers, to pray for my healing. And then off she went to Montreal to St. Joseph's Oratory, where she climbed the steep steps on her hands and knees to plead for my healing. She said she knew that Brother Andre would heal me. Brother Andre was famous throughout Quebec and Ontario and the upper US states for his miraculous healings, most particularly of children with tuberculosis. And when Nana arrived back in Toronto, she immediately insisted that the doctors repeat the chest x-rays. And with the exception of some scar tissue, my lungs were now completely free of tuberculosis. I was discharged. I went home to live with my grandparents in a house full of good aunts. With time, this story faded from the family pool of stories told around the table after Sunday supper. Perhaps because it was my story, I kept the memory and continued to carry it. I did eventually ask my Aunt Shirley, who was the family truth teller, to repeat it. And then later I made the same request of my Aunt Melly, who'd sacrificed that first car for my healing. Each of them had also been carrying the story, each for their own reasons. But my grandmother, well, she never spoke of it again. What a story, Patricia, honestly. And yes, this is the kind of story that shows its presence in a podcast. It's called Law. It's a podcast I'm very, very fond of. But there's a second part to this story, just a short one, and I would like to share what Patricia wrote as the second part to it. It was years later, when I was in my late teens and I had a summer job at a hospital as a summer nurse's aide, that I began to wonder about healing. I was assigned to a medical ward that housed cancer patients and others suffering catastrophic illnesses. These people were terminally ill, and I felt helpless to do anything for them. I've been thinking about life's big questions for years, but that summer, I began to think about suffering. Why some are afflicted while others aren't? Why did I have TB? Why was I healed? And how was I healed? I had enough anecdotal evidence to confirm that I'd been, but because my grandmother wouldn't talk about it, it didn't feel settled for me. Witnessing the doctors and the nurses who did their best to ameliorate suffering, I found myself asking the question that was to send me on my quest. That quest being, what heals? It wasn't until years later, when I could afford a camera and was no longer afraid to travel alone, that I began the journey to answer the question and photograph it as I went. I don't know if my camera gave me a measure of needed separation from what I was seeing, or if I needed the camera to see clearly. I only know that I wouldn't have gone without it. I began with the healing shrines and the places of pilgrimage in France, Lourdes, Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer, Chartres, and then on to Greece to visit the Byzantine healing shrines and to explore the healing myths of Asclepius and the Minoan civilization. And following that, I made contact through a writer friend with a traditional Nanga healer in Zimbabwe and travelled with him for a month to other traditional healers. Good Lord, Patricia. This is a trip. This is its own Netflix documentary. It really is. And I mean that. The places you've been, the places you've seen, the people you've met. Yeah, wow. After listening to the podcast, I went digging through a few boxes of darkroom prints and found a few test prints from the France and Greece trips. The negatives from easily a dozen trips are packed away. My scanner still isn't here, so I took digital photos of a few to send along just to give you an idea of a bit of the work. None of them are stand-up pictures, but I really wanted to show at least something to you. I know there's a project here in this body of work that I'm now calling Pilgrimage, although I could just as easily still call it What Heals. So to my other question, When is a photo story too personal? Is a story such as this something that won't interest people since it's too far outside of the life experience of most of us? Just some grist for the mill. Warm regards from Patricia. Patricia! Just some grist for the mill. My word, that is some story. I started to compose with my ellipses-free keyboard some notes and an answer to your question. I thought I could write the sort of philosophical Sean Tucker type answer because I know he would provide something far more thought-provoking than what I have to say, but I'll do my best. I almost called him up again, actually, for that reason. Do you know, Sean, if you have got this far into the show, then please, if you do have a moment, I'd be really interested in what you have to say about, the answer to that question. When is a photo story too personal? But, I think, oh no, is this going to be a blather moment, Neil? It could be. I think it's just the outward bound part of the journey or the adventure. Overused word journey, I know, but you've opened up far, and one more far more questions and interests. And actually, it's introduced you to photography, this whole thing, hasn't it? Which is a wonderful part of the story. Not an insignificant part by any means. But it's the storytelling that's most important here. Your story, Patricia, has opened you up to other civilizations, other people, personal quests. Not always comfortable, I appreciate. Not always with a happy ending, I know. But thanks St. Anne, who turns out to be a very important historical grandmother. See, I went down the rabbit hole with that story. I shall let my other listener research that one. But thank Anne, you shared it, because these stories, they have to be shared. Because, I'm fearful, with a small f, granted, that this swipe left and right instant gratification culture that we've talked about already today, I do worry, again, small w, as of the moment, that storytelling, is there a danger of it becoming a past art, a lost thing? I like to think storytelling is reclaimed during moments that you've recalled, Patricia. I mean, your letter, your pictures, which, by the way, are so much more than you modestly cast doubt upon in creative terms, I might just add. These words, these pictures, they keep storytelling alive. Because today you told me, and my other listener, and we're so much richer for it. We are. I'm always very flippant about storytelling not being about a cupcake on an Instagrammer's grid, although one day maybe somebody will convince me otherwise. But these are the real stories. These are the important, potent, my favourite word, stories of life. Anyway, there's my 2 pennies worth. My Tucker's worth, if you like. Go and see the pictures on the show page today, please. And if I could have a Columbo, just one more thing moment, Patricia. I guess there is another thing about when a photo story is too personal. I suppose if somebody were to be hurt through the process of telling your story, who doesn't deserve to be, which then becomes a whole debate of its own, because there are some important photo stories that, for their own reasons, do cross that line. But I think you know what I mean. Then it's a story that's definitely worth telling. I think I can hear my other listener prizing open the can of worms with a tin opener. So I shall just say, empathy, compassion, learning. That's what storytelling's about. That's what makes a good story. And thank you, Patricia. It feels like it does feel like a scant offering, with a capital S, by the way, to send you one of our famous, not so famous Photowalk show flasks for your camera bag that you'll be taking on your travels. But do you know what? They're really very good in cold and hot weather. And you sound like you travel to a few interesting places. So I'm going to send you one. Consider it a less than adequate trade from me. We're being buzzed by the first plane of the day. I'm glad you showed up now and not about 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. I was having a quiet moment with Patricia's letter. Go on. Be on your way, plane. Right. Assignment time, I think. It's quite a short and to the point one, this, set by Tim Booth. Second time of mentioning today. Every month, if you are new to these parts, we set an assignment. Well, when I say we, I mean my guest, our guest. It's always in the first episode of the month. Then you have a month to send in your pictures to stories@photowalk.show. 2,500 pixels wide, please. If you can't manage that, then don't worry, as I said, and I did this for Patricia with her amazing, potent, strong pictures. I will do the heavy lifting for you and resize for the show page. That's not a problem. But stories@photowalk.show is the place to send your pictures for everything on the show, and in particular at this point in time, the assignment. And the one that raises my eyebrows gets sent to Famous Not So Famous Show Flask, for which I do have a backlog, by the way, of 5 or 6 to send out right now. I do need to go to the post office. See, and there was you thinking there's a cast of thousands looking after this show. It's a bit different to my BBC days. Depending on the show, there used to be what did we have? There was a producer, a writer, well, sometimes a writer, as I say, depended upon the show, a production assistant, music librarian, researcher, tech op, sometimes 2 of those, and or editor, and then little old me. On top of that, it went up, didn't it? There was a senior editor, a program controller, a director general, and a whole floor of people to get excited about tweets and make a massive story to hide the real one. Don't get political, Neil. Sorry. Did I say that out loud? Sometimes I'm sure I do things like that. Size 9s and all. Anyways, yes, assignment. 3, 2, 1. Back in the room, Neil. Okay, assignment. This month, it's set by Tim Booth, and it is short and sweet and pithy, so stand by. Let's start, Tim, by making things very clear, shall we? What is it that you don't want?
I don't want people to go off and photograph anything particular. What I want them to try and photograph is the most important thing in photography, without which we would have no photography. I'd like them to photograph light, because until you understand light, you're just burrowing about in the dark. And I think if you have to try and photograph, and it doesn't matter whether it's a light bulb or the way the light falls on something, so it doesn't matter what that thing is, but focus on the light before anything else, and then try and make the light the photograph.
There we go, challenge set. You actually only have a couple of weeks left with this now, and I think it's a goodie. So best of luck to you, and send those into stories@photowalk.show. Same address, of course, for the words that you write about photography, for stories that you send in. It doesn't always have to have a picture alongside. I'm delighted when they do, but don't feel that you have to. Sometimes the story, well, we say stories of life told by photographers, so sometimes it can just be some prose, some thoughts from you. Right, second guest time. We are treated this week to 2 guests. I'm thrilled to bits to have 2 very special friends on the show, and Valerie, that little bit of conversation that we shared about the project, nudge, nudge, hint, hint. Actually, I think we'd make a very good team on that. Neil, don't start doing that. You have to fill in the rest now. Oh, no, I can't. I like a good tease. Moving on. We were having a chat, and I asked Valerie to come back and set some assignments on the show that I could use across the year. And, next month's will be Valerie's, as it goes. And she's written a whole book of assignments. So if you like photographing on the street, there's one called Street Photography Assignments. Does exactly what it says on the tin. 75 reasons to hit the streets and learn. Now available in German and Italian as well, which is handy, because Valerie has a love affair for Rome now. I'll link to her books in the show notes. It's been a show about publishing today, hasn't it? Should probably, this is my excuse really, to have another conversation with Valerie about releasing books in the prolific nature that she does. Anyway, while we were recording the assignments, was I going to pass up an opportunity to chat about some of her recent adventures and a couple of golden oldie projects too? Of course I was not. So here is Valerie to lend even more of a French accent to proceedings today. Valerie, you've been travelling a bit of late with your workshops. A bit is an understatement. Mexico City, though, the last one, very exciting. Never been there myself. And it is one of those places where people say, oh, no, it's a bit vibey. Be careful, you'll have your camera stolen within 2 seconds. How did you find it?
Oh, I loved it. And honestly, even though, well, I wasn't by myself a whole lot, but I did go out by myself the couple days before the workshop started. And I never felt like I had to look over my shoulder at all. People were so gracious, so friendly. I had been to Mexico, but never to resorts. I hate that kind of traveling. Yes. I always wanted to be off the beaten path. Mm-hmm. So I had done a Mexico trip with my family before, but in an off the beaten path place where nobody spoke English. And that's my kind of travel. Yeah. Figure if you arrive in a place and everybody speaks English and all the menus are in English, you're in the wrong place or you're not doing travel right. So I had experienced it, and I had always been so impressed by how well we are welcomed and appreciated, and people are just so kind, so friendly. And so Mexico City, I had never been to a city that large. I mean, that's 22 million people. It's the size of a country. You know?
Yeah,
it's just, It's one of the largest cities in the world.
I had no idea.
And so, you know, it makes New York look tiny. And so I did not really know what to expect. And of course, you hear all the things that people tell you. Oh, be careful. You can't be walking around with a camera on your shoulder, blah, blah, blah. And never felt that at all. Seriously. And I went from neighborhood to neighborhood. I hired, of course, for the workshop, a local guide who is both a professional guide and a photographer. And I had 10 photographers with me, and same experience. Everybody loved it. Everybody wants to go back. So I'm actually starting to plan 2024.
Oh, here we go. Oh, I tell you what, you must have some terrible travel nightmares and disasters with menus. If your idea, Valerie, is to go somewhere where you never can understand the menu, you must have had some huge menu disasters in your time.
Well, you have to be adventurous. You know, I tried, how do you call them? Sauterelle, crickets? No.
Yeah. Oh, that's not so unusual these days.
No, and then giant ant eggs or larvae.
Not sure about that one.
Like that.
Don't tell me they taste like chicken.
They don't. And that I didn't care so much for, but they're very expensive. So when someone orders that on the menu, it's like, oh, Valerie, you have to try that. Well, you have to. And although I'm a vegetarian, so I could always play the vegetarian card, but it's fun. You have to try different things. I mean, if you just eat what you know and have your coffee at the local Starbucks, because unfortunately they're there too, you're not going to have the full experience. So you have to really experiment.
I did see some ICM in Mexico, and we've been talking a bit of about ICM of late. And well, actually, in our case, it's been in relation to places like Austria, where you can't identify people anymore. So ICM has become this language of street, which I find a bit lamentable, actually, and a great shame, because I hope the history of Europe will not be just pictures of blurred people. Yeah. But you were doing it for a different reason. People had asked you to do some ICM, and it's harder than it looks, actually, to do it well.
Absolutely. There is really a misconception about ICM. I think I just wrote something about that. Like, a lot of people think it's a bit gimmicky, but honestly, it's really difficult to actually make it work. Yeah. Especially in street photography, where already you don't control a whole lot. You only control your vision and your gear. And so you don't control what people are going to do. So you have to have all the compositional elements just right, as you would in a normally exposed photograph. And then you have to get the right level of movement in the technique. And so it's actually an added element of difficulty to make a successful photograph. And I really started doing that recently, like a year or two ago, for fun. And then this past winter, I challenged myself to do, because I'm in a snowy landscape 6 months of the year. So figure I'm going to do snow with ICM, which you have to then have an ND filter. Obviously, if you keep your shutter open for any amount of time in a white white landscape, you're going to let a lot of light in. So my camera has a electronic ND filter. So I did a lot of snow scenes, daily life in the snow, on the frozen lakes or on the path. Didn't have to be in the city. It could be during a hike, as long as they were people. And it was a lot more difficult than it looked to actually get the right balance to make a compelling photograph.
Is there a magic? It probably isn't. But is there a magic number, a magic combination? Obviously, light changing on the day would alter those parameters to some degree.
I find that 1/8 of a second is good for me. That's because I have an ND filter available. Because 1/8 of a second in bright daylight, it's gonna be blown out, completely blown out if you don't have an ND filter. So people who didn't have one would go at 1/15 and then use their exposure compensation to try to get it. It's going to be overexposed a little bit, but that's kind of part of the look. But I find that 1/8 of a second, and then you experiment with the movement, and it's going to make a difference in the finished image. If you move your camera up and down, you're going to see those lines. If you move it in a circular fashion, again, it's going to make a different look. If you move it forward and backward, it's going to make a different look. So that's part of the fun. It really is fun.
It's funny to watch people doing it, isn't it? It's almost like
exactly.
It's almost like a dance. They're sort of, it's like some sort of wax on, wax off martial arts.
Finding the right balance, because your subject still has to. We still have to see that it's a human figure.
Yes.
The architecture is important, so the architecture will still be visible. The background is really important. The contrast between the subject and the background is equally important. How interesting that subject is going to be and how dynamic their stepping or the gesture will be very important. So all the same element, the balance in the composition, the separation between subjects, if you have a group of people, it all really matters. Reflections can be an added element. So it's fun.
Should you keep the background fairly uncluttered? Because I might have it wrong, but I with the ICM I've tried, when I've tried it, if it's in a city, for example, so much going on in the background, you can't see the wood for the trees, as it were.
That's true. So that's why the contrast is important. Just like you do when you do a panning shot, you have to have contrast between your subject and the background. Otherwise, they all blend in. But sometimes it's all about the architecture, too. So when I worked on a snowy landscape, it was a little easier unless I had trees. Then I was like, okay, well, the subject, because everybody wears black jackets these days in the snow, which actually helped me in the project because at least I could see the people really clearly. So it's really having that balance and that contrast and making sure people are not overlapping dark pine trees in the snowy landscape. So there are a lot of things that come into play in that fraction of a second that will make or break the photograph.
This sounds a very lame question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have a favourite place? I guess it would be the place that doesn't necessarily sell deep fried ants' eggs, but you go to all these fabulous places. You run workshops all around the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll never get tired of photographing in Paris. That's really the one constant that I never, ever felt, oh, I need to take a break for 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Never. I did, however, I worked in Rome for several years and then I needed to take a break. And then I went back this year and I'm good. I'm going to explore other places in Italy. I discovered Copenhagen since we last talked, and I loved it. Absolutely loved Copenhagen. Who knew? I find that it's the best kept secret. I absolutely loved it. For street photography, it was amazing. It was in August. So you have to know when to go as well. Although I find that pretty much any city in the winter can be really special.
And I think you make when you have different weather, especially in the winter. For example, on your website, we have a lot of rain in the UK, as you well know. But unlike cricket, rain doesn't stop play, certainly not in your world. Because I saw there's one whole page dedicated to In fact, there's a French word. I did write it down from your website. Oh, jour de pluie. Is that right?
Jour de pluie. Yeah, that's a whole gallery on rainy days around the world.
So, I mean, you make of each day when you walk out. You shouldn't walk out thinking, oh, it's raining, I can't get anything today.
And I think it's a shame that actually people think of it as a negative. And I think that's probably the fault of the meteorologist. You know, said, oh, unfortunately, it's going to rain for 3 days. Why? We need it, first of all. And it's so beautiful. I must say, though, like on a workshop, if I have a 5-day workshop and the first day is a rainy day, it's a little bit harder to keep the morale of the troops up, if I can say so, because people are like, oh, dang, what are we going to do? I'm like, this is awesome. And I can guarantee you, if I only have like a day or half a day of rain in a workshop, the next day when it's sunny and dry, people are looking for puddles. Life is different on rainy days. People are more in a hurry. You know, there is a lot more activity. And then the umbrellas come out and people say, oh, umbrella pictures are cliche. Well, a good umbrella picture is still a good umbrella picture. And it can be very romantic. There can be a lot of humor. You know, how many times have I seen in New York people's umbrellas turning inside out? Things like that. So the movement of the raincoats and as people are hurrying down the street, the splash of the rain. No, it's all good. It's all good.
I do remember things you tell me, by the way. But whenever it rains, there's one thing I remember you in particular said to me, which was, people are much easier to photograph on rainy days because they don't care about you.
That's right. And use, we had talked about filters, I think, for one of the episodes. Yeah. And I bought one of those plastic bell-shaped umbrellas. And you can actually shoot through it and use that plastic with the rain on it as a filter between you and life on the streets. And it's so fun.
I would imagine you have to go a long way to find pictures devoid of people in your work, and I'm referring here to the rain one because there was one in the Jour de pluie, which I hope I'm saying correctly. There was one in that gallery which was just simply a picture through a window. I'm not sure it was an umbrella. I think it was a window one. That one. There were no people in it, and I was thinking, this is a bit unusual. Where's Valerie's people?
I do a lot of contemplative work and architectural details, abstracts. I love that too. And I do teach other types of photography besides street photography. But you tend to be typecasted in this business. So people usually think of me as a street photographer. I don't like being known as a street photographer because if you're a good photographer, you should be good at photographing pretty much anything.
Well, so what's on your business card then? What does it say?
I'm just a photographer.
Right.
I'm a visual storyteller.
Right.
Street photography, I don't like the word street because I spend a lot of time on the beach photographing people and on the lakes and around the lakes. And so street right there, I think there is a problem with the expression. I think documentary or narrative photography is a better way to describe what we do. And some of my visual storytelling workshops, it's not just about people. Yes, they're a big part of your travel photography, because without people, what's the point of traveling, right? That's why we travel. Usually it's for culture and meeting new people, sharing experiences with people from different cultures and trying to learn languages. I mean, that to me, that's what travel is, besides the beautiful vistas. In travel photography, including the locals, of course, is key, but it's so much more than that. It's seeing outside the postcard, basically, and how do you tell the story of an iconic place without getting into the postcard shots. And so I love opening photographers' eyes to different ways to tell a story that's not going to be so repetitive or everybody's seen this before.
I was looking at your features. I'm sure we didn't talk about this one last time, but I love typewriters. I brought mine down for you especially. You see? I'll hold it up. I know this doesn't mean anything on a podcast because you're listening to this, but Valerie can see that. And you photograph people in places. Yes, it was extreme.
Extreme typing.
What's extreme typing? Explain that for a start.
I'm going to have to tell my friend Charlie to listen to this. So I have this friend here who is a musician,
right?
Well-known and respected composer, I suppose, and guitar player and singer. And he loves typewriters and he collects them. And then it was just before the pandemic, or maybe during the pandemic, where he started taking his typewriter in really unusual places, like in a hollow tree or in a snowbank.
He was on a boxcar, I think, a boxcar railway.
Yes, on the railroad. Yeah, by the railroad. Yeah. But he actually writes on the spot a story about the location where we are.
Oh.
So it's all about the location and using a typewriter. One of them was the same typewriter that were used during World War II, for example. You know, when they had to there was the laptop of the time, basically this really tiny typewriter that they could bring everywhere. So he writes a story about the place where we are, and then I take pictures. Unfortunately, I can't go everywhere he goes, so he's had other people photograph him, and I think it's going to be a book eventually.
Fantastic.
And but it's become kind of a thing. So there are people doing extreme typing around the world now, and taking their typewriter to really odd places.
I'm going to take my Silver Reed SR100 tabulator to more places. Look, I'll start with Dear Valerie. I've got the first few letters ready for you. Do you ever get creative block?
Well, yes, that happens to everyone, and that's why it's important to love the process as much as the result. I'm okay walking for miles and having nothing to show for at the end of the day because I love the process so much. I love seeing moments of life, even if I don't. Obviously, we're going to miss more than we're going to capture, right? But seeing it is so beautiful in itself. So I think, especially in this type of photography, but I think it applies with landscape. I'm sure landscape photographers feel the same way, where they walk and nothing really catches their eye, but they appreciate it, the process, the walk, and the connection with nature. And I feel the same way with the city. And so you're not going to be a very happy, quote unquote, street photographer if you don't like the process. It's really about loving life and people and the beauty of everyday life, and capturing it with your camera. That's a different thing. Yeah, good if you do, but if you don't, you should still be really happy to be privileged to experience it, because not everybody sees. They look, but they don't see. And so just seeing it, even if you don't capture it, should be a reward. And also, and I tell my students that all the time because I hear it on workshops all the time. Oh, I saw this amazing. The light was perfect. The subject went through the light. It was just perfect, but I missed it. I'm like, well, no, you didn't get the picture, but you didn't miss it. You saw it. And that's learning right there.
Do you want a challenge?
Oh, boy. Sure.
I'm asking, I'm sure this won't be the end of every single interview across 2023, but it does seem to be creeping in quite a lot at the moment. And I think maybe by the end of the year, I might have a really interesting program of its own from the answers that I get to this particular question from all the photographers, the creatives, and the people that I've asked it of. So that's my way of sort of winding you up into this question. Okay. Now, this your answer actually could be photographic. It could be, and I think it might be with you, a bit more human level. What's your why?
I think the camera is a way to meet people. I think, for one thing, because I love interactions. Although photography is a very solitary pursuit, right?
Yeah.
And I love seeing through my lens. And I really feel like I have 23 millimeter vision because I see the world through the same lens all the time. Although I'm trying something new right now. I don't know what it's going to do. And photography for me is sharing my passion.
Yeah.
It's not about talking about me. It's not about showing my work. Of course, I have to do that because that's how people want to learn more, and they want to learn from me and travel with me. But it's not about having exhibits. It's not about doing competitions. I don't care about that, honestly. I've done that. I've had exhibits. Yes, it's wonderful, and who doesn't need that little ego boost? But it's a lot of work, and honestly, to me, that's totally secondary. Same as writing books. You'd think, your first published book with a publisher, it's like, yay. No, it was so anticlimactic, I can't even tell you. Now I'm doing ebooks because I want to be able to share with more people. I think it's all about sharing my passion, because I'm so happy doing what I do. And I want to contaminate as many people as possible with this passion that I have. And whether it's through my writings or online stuff, to share and spread that love that I see changes people's lives. Photography changes lives. And I've heard that so many times. It's therapeutic for so many people. So for me, I do this because having my camera in my hand is like my security blanket, for a child. I can't go anywhere without it, or I feel really anxious if I don't have it. Even if I don't use it, I feel better if I have it. And then trying to communicate that passion to others. And because I feel so fortunate to have that in my life. I mean, the day I started late, but it totally changed my life, completely changed my life. So
when you say late, what is late?
In my late 20s.
Okay.
Yeah. That's late. I had a camera before, but it was never a thing. So I started really late, and it really changed everything. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you an extra question, actually. 23 millimeter lens. So I assume you're using your Fujifilm X100V.
So it's a 35 equivalent.
So 35 equivalent. So you said you're changing up a bit, or you're changing, or what's the world going to look like through what lens?
I don't know yet. Fujifilm sent me an X-T5 to try for a few weeks.
Nice.
It took me 2 weeks to get it out of the box.
What?
So exactly. And I kind of feel a bit embarrassed about that, because I know people are lusting about new gear, but I'm not. I have two X100Vs.
I know.
Because I need a backup, and that's all I need. So I'm not even sure what lens I'm going to put on it. Right now I have a Lens Baby Sol 45, which is a creative lens, which I love. And I didn't have a camera body to put those lenses on anymore. So I'm excited about that. That might be it. I have 2 or 3 Fuji lenses that I could put on it, but I don't want to start shooting at 35. I like 23, and I have a 16, which is beautiful, but it's out of it. It's going to slow me down. And so what's the point, right? If it's not broken, don't fix it. And I like 23.
I bet you that camera's not going to come out of its box.
Well, I took it out of the box. I charged it, and every time I'm about to go out, I grab the other one. So, yeah.
We won't tell anybody.
I mean, it just feels so foreign. And I don't like trying new gear. So I find it very counterproductive. So Fujifilm knows that. I'm still one of their ambassadors, but they know I'm a one camera person. Hang on, camera, one lens.
I'm just going to send a note. Dear Fuji, stop sending Valerie stuff she doesn't need or want. I think the whole Y thing is going to make a really good holiday special toward the end of the year. I really do. Perhaps even some sort of publishing project. What do you think? Anyway, my thanks to Valerie. Always an absolute joy, pleasure, privilege, fun to talk with Valerie. I do enjoy having friends come back onto the show. It feels like you and I, our friends that speak to us and share their stories, we're all together in this sort of in the podcast version of a coffee shop. We've stopped halfway along our walk to have some refreshments, share some thoughts. Don't tell my other listener though. They always take the last slice of coffee cake. They're a bit like that. Anyway, for links to Valerie and other photographers you've heard from or about today, socials and websites mentioned, and the films, of course, then go to today's show page, episode 373. And, of course, there's a link in your podcast player app. I know sometimes some podcast player apps, they misbehave a tad when it comes to linking back to pages. So if yours is one of those, then just remember photowalk.show and you'll find the episode page really easily. And if you can, and you feel so inclined and you don't mind helping, because that's what keeps the podcast here, it really does, then if you could copy paste that show page address into a social of yours like Twitter or Facebook. Other socials and places are available. LinkedIn, maybe, I don't know, why not? Then that helps, that really does help us grow with this show and find more photo walkers to share stories and pictures with and from. Right, play out song today. It's a right perky number, he says in colloquial reference to a whimsical, light, fluffy burst of bubbly folk. It's Above the Clouds by Sun River. Brilliant song, I love it. And I needed a perky number because I thought I wanted something to match the conversation with Valerie and the fun we always have when we have a chat. But if you don't mind, Valerie, I'm going to slightly change the emphasis of why this song is going to make me smile. Clearly because of our conversation, yes, and my chat too with Sean, but also because, guess what happened as we were walking along just a moment ago together, you and I. Did you see me go to the phone to get the text? Oh, I did, Neil. I wondered what that was about. Well, I'll tell you. I've had a message to say that Barney, Sir Barkalot, is up and about. Yes, perhaps not wagging his tail in quite so helicopter-like fashion at the moment, but he's had something to eat. His ears are all perked up. Laura says, the vet Laura says he's a super little chap, and he's sitting up and he's waiting for you to turn up and pick him up. So that's exactly what I'm going to do while we listen to this song. I am. Oh, Sir Barkalot, I'm coming for you. But I can't leave you without a postscript, can I? Let's have another travel one. Now, I know we had a travel one last week, but I'm going to have another one this week because it does feel like we've been journeying a bit in this episode today, doesn't it? We've been to America land, been to Canada land. We sort of dipped into Saudi Arabia, didn't we? Been to China, been to France. Blimey. Our passport, our figurative passport, has well and truly been stamped today, hasn't it? We're travellers, you and I. So here's a PS, a travel PS from Dana Beres, who says, of travel and adventures, jobs may fill your pockets, but adventures, well, they fill your soul.
Don't leave me behind here. I've just arrived. I've been waiting for someone to take me away, far away.
I'll take my time, dear, just to keep you around here. Know what they say, you can't keep the clouds away, away, far away. Every day is a brand new day. All my life I've been searching for the right way to keep my head above the clouds, to keep myself from looking down. It's harder than you think to live our days in happiness and worry about what happens next. It's harder than you think to. It's harder than you think.
it's all just a game we play. I've been losing myself in every single way. At least I still have you.
I've played all my cards, and I'm all out of luck. Put my money in the jackpot, but I guess it's falling through.
At least I still have you. Every day is a brand new day. All my life I've been searching for the right way to keep my head above the clouds, to keep myself from looking down. It's harder than you think to live our days in happiness or worry about what happens next. It's harder than you think to be. I'm just taking my time, just taking my time here.
I'm just taking my time, just taking my time, dear.
I won't leave you behind, won't leave you behind, dear.
I won't leave you behind, won't leave you behind, here.
I'm just taking my time, just taking my time here. I won't leave you behind, won't leave you behind, dear. Every day is a brand new day. All my life I've been searching for the right way to keep my head above the clouds, to keep myself from looking down. It's harder than you think to live our days in happiness or worry about what happens next. It's harder than you think to. It's harder than you think to be. It's harder than you think.
It's harder than you think.
And that is it. Sun Rivers, Above the Clouds. Marvellous. And, well, that is it for this week. My thanks to Sean Tucker and Valerie Jardin once more. All links are on the show page. The Extra Mile is out. And a reminder that this week, Sean Tucker, that is, attempts the role of 12. We're talking about culture and being a photographer in Saudi Arabia. Plus, there's the Extra Mile's very own mailbag. An hour of midweek walking available now, so go across to hear that. Final virtual fist bumps go to Neil Ford, head of all that IT stuff that only works after he's taken a hammer to it. Emily Rainier for your eyes in our Facebook group, and Andrea Gilpin, Chief of Staff for the Instagram and Ideas floor, and to Artlist for the music. And I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you next time.
The Photowalk is a Loading Zone production.